Elizabeth Warren has taken on education in a big way. She wants to quadruple federal Title I funding to schools with high proportions of students from low-income families. Now, why would that be? Because we pay for schools in the United States with a property tax. And property taxes in low-income neighborhoods are crappy, and, they're very little money, and so the schools aren't good. Schools in high-income neighborhoods really, really do well. And so let's let's bring them up, right? This would change the funding formula. She wants to invest in school buildings, which are all too often crumbling. Basically, since the Reagan tax cuts, we stopped putting money into infrastructure like that. Another point is that she says that our schools, because our schools are funded the property tax way, because of all this, poor schools in poor neighborhoods, good schools in good neighborhoods, what happens is that where there's good schools, property values start going up. As property values go up, lower income people get pushed out, and including minorities. Her actual statement, modern residential segregation is driven at least in part by income inequality and parents seeking out the best possible school districts for their children. By investing more money in all our public schools and helping ensure that every public school is a great one, my plan will address one of the key drivers of residential segregation. She's calling for canceling student lunch debt and calling for free school breakfasts and lunches. I don't know if you saw the study over the weekend. I think it was in the Washington Post, that regardless of income, regardless of school district, those schools that have free school lunches, the kids perform better. It's just a remarkable study. Stopping the teaching to the test, pay our teachers better. She says to keep our traditional school systems strong, we must resist efforts to divert public funds out of traditional public schools. She wants a ban on for-profit charter schools. She wants the existing charter schools to have the same oversight and transparency as public schools. Right now, they get a pass. And she wants to crack down on rampant fraud in the for-profit charter school industry. All good ideas in my mind. On the other hand, Julio Rivera says no. He's the editorial director of Reactionary Times, columnist with Newsmax, The American Thinker, and townhall.com. ReactionaryTimes.com is the website. And Julio, your Twitter handle is, oh yeah, it's Julio. Julio, welcome back.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. First off, let me say, I'm sorry for your loss. Your friend John Conyers there. I'm sorry to hear that.
He was a good guy.
But let me... Yeah, I mean, obviously I didn't agree with him on a lot of things politically, but I'm sorry to hear that. I have to say this. I mean, I can see very clearly that this is just another attempt by Elizabeth Warren and the statists, of her ilk to try to grab a stranglehold on the education of our children. The fact of the matter is charter schools are important. Education choice is important. They're running this thing right now, the Common Core system previously and what's been going on with, the Department of Education, which I feel quite frankly should be abolished because it's being abused. You can't have unelected bureaucrats deciding what our children are going to learn on the federal level. Curriculums and the way our children are taught and the way that the education is run should be done on the local level. The people that are actually dealing with our children, I think, have a better idea of how to educate them. Yeah, now, you get this. This has become a racket with the curriculums and the textbooks.
Take a breath for a second here. You've just thrown out like 6 or 8 different things. Let's just start at the beginning. You said that Elizabeth Warren is a statist.
Yeah.
I agree. She is following in the tradition of Franklin Roosevelt. She believes that the government, when it does what the people want, can actually do good things. Now, the government hasn't done what the people want since the 1980s, and I blame the Supreme Court for that, making money into free speech. But and right now we know from the Gillens and Page study that the odds of what the bottom 90% of Americans want being passed into law are actually lower than the odds of random occurrence, whereas the odds of the top 10%'s desires getting passed into law are very high. So, yeah, if we go back, right now statism isn't working because the state has been captured by corporate interests. You called Warren, and me, by extension, statists. I would say that the position that you're taking, Julio, is a corporatist position, which, No,
it's not a corporatist. It's an individual position. Listen, I don't want a centralized Washington, D.C. deciding what the children are taught. And I don't really necessarily think that the states are doing much of a better job either. Look what's going on in California right now, where they're trying to teach sex education to kindergartners and graphic.
No,
detail,
they're basically teaching kindergartners to look out for sexual abuse. But here, this is what Franklin Roosevelt said in 1938.
They're teaching them about sexual activity at an age where their maturity level is not where they can process.
Yeah. Julio, you're blowing this all out of proportion. Franklin Roosevelt said the first truth is, this is in his address to Congress in 1938, his State of the Union address. He said the first truth is that the liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than their democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism. Ownership of government by an individual, by a group, or by any other controlling private power. And that's the essence of our debate. You're taking the position that private companies should be, running our schools, owning our schools, deciding what our children learn, and I'm taking the position that we, the people, should be making those decisions through our democratically elected representatives.
No, you're making the argument that the government should have total and complete, unrestrained control of the education
because the government is us. You're making the argument that should be in the hands of some corporation.
You believe that, don't you, Tom?
I do.
The fact of the matter is, listen, me as a parent, I have 2 children. I want to have the choice if I can get my kid into a charter school, or if I can get tax breaks for educating my kid, either homeschooling my child or sending them to a private school.
Julio, I have no problem with any of that. Liz and I have 3 kids. One went to a private school, one was homeschooled, and one went to the public schools. I mean, I don't have a problem with that. What I'm saying is I don't want my tax dollars funding your private school. I don't want my tax dollars funding your Christian academy. I don't want my tax dollars funding, your
But what if it's the Christian academy or the school that you wind up sending your child to directly? Like, there needs to be serious reforms as far as what kind of tax credits individuals who want to send their child to
Let's have serious reforms like Elizabeth Warren is proposing that actually turn every public school into a world-class school. Every other developed country in the world does this.
Really?
Why can't we do it in America?
Do you really believe that the government is capable of doing that, though, Tom?
Please name one country for me.
The government can't even run the DMV. They can't even make the post office profitable.
Name one country for me, neither of which are true. Name one country for me where private schools have supplanted public schools and it's worked out well.
I don't care what other countries are doing, quite frankly. I think that what we need to worry about
what you're suggesting doesn't work. We've been doing this experiment since Reagan, right? It was in the 1980s when they rolled out this whole "let's use tax dollars for private school" things with a lot of help from Jerry Falwell. He wanted to start his own schools, and some of it goes back to the 50s when Virginia and Maryland, some counties in those 2 states, and one of the states, I forget which one, shut down their entire public school system for a year because they didn't want to have to integrate it after the Brown v. Board education decision. And that's what's largely been animating this whole private school thing ever since is, oh, my God, I don't want my kid going to school with minorities.
Being able to think, no, it has nothing to do with that,
But this experiment has failed. Our schools worked really well before Reagan came along and started doing this. We had great schools in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
We didn't have a Department of Education back then. That's what you're failing to see, Tom. All these big federal programs are designed to teach the children all the same thing, and it doesn't serve to make America better if everybody is learning the same thing. We have to have diversity. These charter schools all have different specialties, which wind up teaching these, for the professions of the future. I mean, how are we going to find our professionals?
If you want to send your kid to a private school that just teaches acting, go for it. But don't ask me for the tax money.
There's STEM schools. There's STEM schools out there. That way we teach our own kids to these professions. We don't have to keep importing these people.
If you think that it's not, if you want to send your kids
that Americans should have.
Well, if you want to send your kids to a school where they teach science and math to the exclusion of social studies and anthropology and history, go for it. But don't ask me to pay for it.
Well, you know what?
I don't get why you're asking me to pay for your preferences.
I think that's a big part of the conversation.
Well,
I think parents don't have the power to try to help their kids
all
get the
Elizabeth
education that
Warren,
they want them to get.
Julio,
because
all
the government
Warren is
wants to grab
saying,
with both hands.
All Warren is saying is let's make our public schools world class. And if you want to have private schools, charter schools, or any other kind of school,
that's a
pay for it yourself,
platitude.
damn it.
Let's make our public schools world class. What does that even mean, Tom?
It means bring them up to the standards of the rest of the world. Fully fund all of them. So if you live in a poor neighborhood, you don't have a crappy school. It's just that simple.
I mean, listen, the fact of the matter is there's some like, listen, I'll tell you like this. Where I went to school, there were 6 eighth grade classes. There were 216 kids in the 8th grade. When I went to high school, there were 3,000 kids in the school. You know how many kids were in my graduating class? Less than 700. We lost about 80% of the students from my freshman year to my senior year. Are the schools in the inner cities terrible? Yes, of course they are.
So
but
let's fix them.
You know why?
Because of the property tax. Because they're funded by property taxes.
Jersey took over. Let me tell you something, and I'm going to tell you something. This is a bombshell.
You got 5.
When I took my 8th grade California achievement test. Oh, come on! You're not going to let me get the
I had no choice, Julio. At 18 minutes after the hour, there's a hard break.
I know. All right. Well, you know what? I'm going to write a column about this, and I'm going to point out this conversation because
cool. And I'll bring it back, and we can finish the conversation. Another time. But Julio Rivera.